Call came at 2014 in the morning, and I knew before I even answered it. I'd been a combat medic long enough to understand what silence on the other end of a phone call means. It's not nothing. Silence has weight and texture. It breathes differently depending on what surrounds it, and the silence that greeted me when I pressed the phone to my ear that Tuesday night in October was the kind that makes your chest go cold before a single word is spoken. "Claire," I said, a soft sound, half breath, half sob. Then my older sister's voice, barely a whisper. I didn't know who else to call. I was already out of bed, already reaching for my keys. The drive from my apartment in South Charlotte to her neighborhood took 22 minutes at that hour. I did it in 15. The roads were empty, the streetlights casting long orange pools across the wet asphalt, and I gripped the steering wheel with both hands and told myself to breathe, to stay calm, to be the version of myself I'd trained to be, the one who could walk into chaos without becoming part of it. But I was also her little sister. And those two things were fighting each other the entire drive. She had texted me the address of a gas station 2 blocks from her house. Not her house, a gas station. That detail alone told me everything. She hadn't felt safe enough to wait on her own porch. I spotted her immediately, standing near the air pump in the far corner of the lot, her coat pulled tight around her, her head down. When my headlights swept across her, she flinched. Even from inside the car, I could see her flinch. I parked and got out slowly. I didn't rush. People in crisis don't need you to run at them. They need you to approach like the ground under their feet might give way, because that's exactly how it feels to them. When she finally looked up, I had to force every muscle in my face to stay still. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut. There was a cut above her eyebrow. Dried blood, tracking down the side of her face in a thin, dark line. She was holding her left arm close to her body in the careful, deliberate way that meant it hurt to let it hang naturally. I closed the distance between us, opened my arms, and she walked into them like a child who'd been lost for a very long time. Neither of us said anything for a full minute. Back in my car with the heat running, I worked through what I knew how to do. I treated injuries in conditions most people never imagine. Dust and heat and bad light and worse odds. I knew how to assess, how to document, how to keep my voice even when everything inside me was screaming. I checked her eye, her arm, asked about her ribs. 2 of them were bruised, possibly cracked. Her wrist had been grabbed hard enough to leave a full hand pattern, the same 4-finger stripe I'd seen in medical training photographs used to identify defensive injuries. "How long?" I asked quietly when she wouldn't stop apologizing for waking me up. She looked at the windshield. "A while." "How long is a while, Claire?" She turned the seatbelt over in her hands. 3 years, maybe. The first time was about 3 years ago. I told myself it was a one-time thing. He was stressed at work, and I'd said something wrong, and "Stop." I said it gently. "There's no version of something you said that made this happen." She didn't answer. I recognized that silence, too. It was the silence of a person who had been told the opposite so many times that the truth felt like a foreign language now. Derek had seemed like the right kind of man at first, or at least the right-looking kind. He sold commercial real estate in the greater Charlotte area, drove a clean truck, remembered people's birthdays, made easy conversation at cookouts. Everyone liked him. That was the thing people always missed, the ones on the outside. Abusers are rarely the cartoonish villains people imagine. The dangerous ones are charming. They get voted onto the neighborhood association board. They coach youth soccer. They hug you at Christmas with both arms and ask about your job, and you walk away thinking what a good guy he is. He had never liked me much. I was the one variable in Claire's life he couldn't fully control. I was 2 years younger than her, single, with my own apartment and my own income. And when I came back from my second deployment with the Army, something about me put him on edge. He stopped inviting me to things. He made small comments, the kind that were easy to dismiss individually, about how Claire always seemed more anxious when I was around, how maybe the two of us talk too much, how sisters can have unhealthy dynamics. One small comment at a time. He had been building a wall between her and everyone who might have noticed what was happening behind closed doors. By the time I understood the full scope of it that night in my car, I had been shut out of my sister's daily life for almost 2 years. She cried, telling me the rest of it. Not the crying that people perform or that comes out in neat narrative sobs. The ugly, broken kind, where the sentences stop making sense and you have to piece it together from fragments. The way he checked her phone, the joint account that he controlled so completely she had to text him to ask permission to buy groceries above a certain amount. The way he locked the bedroom door from the outside with a simple hook-and-eye latch he'd installed himself, something no one else ever saw. The 2 occasions where he had told her, very calmly, what he was capable of if she ever embarrassed him. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" I asked. My voice was steady. My hands in my lap were not. She stared at the dashboard vents. "Because you would have gone over there." "Yes," I said. "I would have." "And then what?" She looked at me. Eyes swollen, voice raw. "He would have called the police. He would have said you threatened him. He's a respected businessman. He coaches kids' soccer. You're a 29-year-old with a temper and a deployment on your record. Who do you think they believe?" I didn't answer because she was right. That was the part that people on the outside rarely understood. It wasn't just the abuser you were up against. It was the entire architecture of credibility he had spent years constructing. "Okay," I said after a long moment. "Then we do this differently." She slept on my couch that night, and I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and the methodical part of my brain working through options the way it had been trained to, not with emotion, with inventory. What did we have? What did we need? What was the timeline? I knew one thing for certain by the time the sun came up: a direct confrontation would help nobody. Derek was too careful, too practiced, too good at the performance of being a reasonable man. He would out-lawyer her, out-charm every mediator, and outcry every judge if it came to that. And Claire was too worn down, too isolated, too convinced that her own perception couldn't be trusted to survive a war of attrition in the legal system without something concrete behind her. What I needed was his own words, his own behavior, observed by more than just Claire, whose testimony he would spend every dollar he had discrediting. That morning over coffee, while Claire sat across from me with a bag of ice against her eye, she mentioned the dinner. It was a company event, annual, held at a hotel ballroom downtown. Derek's real estate firm did a fall client appreciation night every year. The kind of thing with cocktail hour and round tables and a DJ who played too loud. Derek had already told her she was attending. Not asked. Told. Claire was expected to be there, presentable, smiling, the appropriate accessory on his arm while he worked the room. "He'll be furious if I don't show up," she said. "He'll call it abandonment. He'll tell his mother, tell his partners, frame it as me having some kind of breakdown. What does he tell people about you in general?" She wrapped both hands around her mug. "That I'm fragile. That I struggle with anxiety. That he's very patient with me." Her voice was flat. The kind of flat that comes from hearing something said about you so many times that you've stopped feeling the insult. I looked at her across the table. Then I looked at the two of us reflected in the dark window above the sink. We had the same mother's jawline, the same hair color, a medium brown that both of us had been dyeing the same shade since our 20s. We were different heights by about an inch, built similarly. In our teenage years, people who didn't know us well mixed us up regularly, at church, at school, at our father's work functions. We weren't twins. We were just sisters who looked like sisters in a way that most siblings don't anymore. "Claire," I said slowly, "what if you didn't go to the dinner?" She frowned. "He won't accept that." "No," I said. "What if you didn't go?" And I went instead. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room. She shook her head almost immediately. "That's insane. Maybe. He'll know. He'll see right through it." "Will he?" I leaned forward. When's the last time Derek really looked at you? Not checked your phone, not watched where you went, not monitored your grocery receipts. When did he last actually look at you the way someone looks at a person they love? She didn't answer. I'm not going in there to start a fight, I said. I'm going in to let him be exactly who he is in a room full of witnesses. People with names. People with memories. And I'll have my phone recording everything the moment we're alone. He's unpredictable when he drinks. I know, I said. That's what I'm counting on. She tried to talk me out of it for most of the morning. She told me I didn't know his tells, his patterns, the specific ways he moved when he was looking for a reason to escalate, so I asked her to teach me. Every detail, every habit, the way he stood when he was measuring someone, the phrase he used to signal he was done being patient, the expression he made right before his voice dropped. We spent 4 hours at that kitchen table, and then another 2 in my living room, with me walking and talking and her watching, redirecting. You're holding your shoulders too high, she said. I round mine when I'm around him. It happened so gradually I didn't even notice until you just did the opposite. I consciously dropped my shoulders. And your voice, you sound too certain when you talk. I hedge everything. I've been hedging everything for so long. I practiced. We practiced. There was a moment late in the afternoon when she went very quiet, watching me move around the room with her posture and her hesitation. Her eyes filled and she pressed her hand over her mouth. What? I asked. I just realized, she said softly. I taught you how to be afraid. I crossed the room and took her hands. And you survived being afraid for 3 years. That's not weakness, that's extraordinary endurance. But you don't have to endure it anymore. The night of the dinner, I wore her black dress and her small pearl earrings. She did my hair the way she wore hers, a low side part, the ends curled under. Her makeup, her perfume. When she finished and stepped back, she looked at me in the mirror for a long moment without speaking. I can't tell if I'm relieved or terrified, she whispered. Both is correct, I said. She would stay at my apartment. Doors locked, phone charged. She would text me every hour, and I would respond only when I could do so without drawing attention. My phone would be recording continuously from the moment I entered the hotel. I drove across town in her car, her insurance card and her wallet in her purse on the passenger seat. The Charlotte skyline caught the last bit of sunset on the way, the kind of orange and gold that makes the city look like it's on fire in a beautiful way. I kept the radio off and ran through everything one more time in my head, not because I was nervous, but because preparation is what keeps you calm under pressure. I had learned that in places far less comfortable than a hotel ballroom. Derek was already working the room when I arrived. I saw him before he saw me, standing near the bar with 2 men in blazers, laughing at something with his hand on one man's shoulder. He looked exactly like what he wanted people to think he was. Easy, warm, the kind of man who puts people at ease. He noticed me crossing the room, and his expression shifted for just a fraction of a second. A recalibration. He covered it quickly, but I caught it. He'd been expecting her, and something about the way I moved made him look twice. I dropped my shoulders. I let my gaze fall slightly below his face. I made myself uncertain with my body in a way that cost me more than I expected. There you are, he said, and kissed my cheek. His hand went to the small of my back, a gesture that looked affectionate and functioned as control. I felt the slight pressure of it, the gentle direction. Sorry I'm late, I murmured. He introduced me to his colleagues by Claire's name, and I smiled and nodded and let the conversation move around me the way she would have, contributing small agreements, laughing a beat after everyone else. I watched him, the way he tracked my position in the room when he was talking to other people, the way he tensed slightly when I spoke to a woman his age at our table without him being part of the conversation. He caught my eye across the table more than once with a look that said he was monitoring. By the time the dinner plates were cleared, I understood something with full clarity that I had only understood intellectually before. She had been living inside a surveillance system disguised as a marriage. He found a moment when the couple to our left had gone to the dance floor and leaned toward me under the noise of the DJ starting up. "You look different tonight," he said quietly. His voice was pleasant. His eyes were not. "Do I?" I said. "You usually don't hold your wine glass like that." His eyes moved to my hand. I was holding the stem instead of the bowl. A small thing. He had noticed it. I set the glass down and wrapped my hands in my lap. "I'm a little nervous," I said. "Big crowd." He studied me. Something moved behind his eyes. "You've been different since last night," he said, acting like you're waiting for something. "I'm fine," I said. "You're not fine," he said, still pleasant, still quiet enough that no one around us could hear. "You never came home last night. I woke up and you were gone. I've been generous about not making a scene tonight, but that ends when we leave." My pulse didn't change. I had been in situations where the person across from me had a weapon. I had been in situations where the person across from me had a weapon. I had been in situations with actual stakes, terminal ones. Derek's controlled dinner party voice was not a threat I couldn't manage. I looked at him levelly. "You were asleep when I left." "You don't leave?" he said, the warmth thinning at the edges now. "That's not something you do." "Maybe it is now," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. He reached under the table and his hand closed around my wrist, not hard enough to leave a mark, hard enough to remind me he could. "We are not doing this here," he said. "You're right," I said, just as quietly. "Let's step outside." The patio off the ballroom was nearly empty. Two men smoking near the far railing, close enough that their presence mattered. I positioned myself with my back to the door, facing Derek, the recording running in my purse. He ran a hand through his hair and blew out a breath, already shifting into the version of himself he deployed when he wanted to re-establish calm before he re-established control. "I don't know what's gotten into you," he said. "I really don't. Whatever you think happened last night, I know what happened last night," I said. "You're confused. You get confused when you're anxious, and you've been anxious for weeks. You know that." "Say that again," I said, "that I get confused." He stopped. Tilt his head. Something was happening behind his eyes now, a recalculation, the same look I'd seen at the bar when I crossed the room. "You've been drinking," he said. "I've had half a glass of wine," I said. "Same as every time you tell me I'm not remembering correctly." "Claire." 3 years, I said. 3 years of you deciding what I remember and what I don't. What I'm allowed to buy, where I'm allowed to go, who I'm allowed to talk to. 3 years of that latch on the bedroom door." He went very still. "The one you installed yourself," I continued. "The little hook and eye one. I always thought that was the detail that would matter most. So specific, so easy to explain away as some home improvement project. But a little hard to explain in context, isn't it?" His voice dropped to something flat and cold. "Who have you been talking to?" "Myself," I said. "For a long time. But not anymore. You're going to regret this," he said. The warmth was entirely gone now. "You don't have anything. You think you do, but you don't. And when this is over, when you come back to the house and this little episode is done, things are going to be very different for you. I promise you that." I let that sit. I let him hear himself in the silence. "That's a threat," I said calmly. "That's a fact," he said. "Good," I said. "I want to be very clear about what this is." He looked at me for a long moment. One of the smokers at the far railing shifted, glancing over briefly, and I saw Derek register the witness. I saw the calculation move across his face as he understood that whatever he said next had an audience. "I want you to go back inside," he said, very quietly, "and we're going to go home together tonight and talk about this like adults." "No," I said, "we're not." And then I did something I had been saving. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and turned the screen toward him. He could see the recording timer in the corner, The red light, the waveform still moving. He stared at it. His face went the color of old ash. He couldn't finish the sentence. Your own words, I said. Exactly as you said them. He reached for the phone and I stepped back, a single clean step that put distance between us without drama. Don't, I said. He stood there with his hand extended and nothing to close it around. This is who you've been, I said. Every night, in that house, with her. This is what she's been living inside of. You're going to destroy me, he said. His voice had changed entirely. There was something almost bewildered in it, the voice of a man who had always controlled the story and was suddenly watching it leave his hands. I'm going to make sure she's safe, I said. What happens to you after that depends entirely on what you choose to do next. He sat down heavily on the low patio wall. Around us, Charlotte hummed quietly under its orange light. Somewhere inside, the DJ had shifted to something slow. I could feel the bass through the glass doors. She's not coming back, is she? He said. It wasn't a question. Not to that house, I said. Not to that version of things. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I didn't plan for it to become this, he said. It never starts planned, I said. That doesn't make it survivable for her. What do I do? He said. And the question sounded like it came from somewhere very far down. Like it had been waiting a long time to get said. I looked at him sitting there in his expensive blazer on a hotel patio, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not mercy, not sympathy exactly. Something closer to the recognition of a person who had been using anger to paper over something hollow inside himself, and who had never once been made to look at the damage. Not because he didn't know, because no one had ever forced him to stop long enough to see it. You stop drinking, I said. You get into a real program. You speak to an attorney about the separation agreement and you don't make it difficult. You get into therapy, real therapy, not the kind where you perform improvement for 6 sessions and declare yourself fixed. And you never contact her without her attorney present. He nodded once, a small mechanical motion. And the latch comes off the bedroom door, I said. Tomorrow. I left him there. I don't know how long he sat on that patio wall. I didn't look back. The drive home felt entirely different from the drive there. The same city, the same streets, the same orange light on the wet pavement. But the weight I'd been carrying from the moment Claire called me had shifted, not gone. You don't carry something that heavy for someone you love and put it down easily. But it had changed shape. It was lighter in the places where I'd been holding it alone. When I pulled into my parking lot, the light was on in my front window. I could see the shadow of movement inside. I sat for a moment before I went in, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. She opened the door before I reached the top of the stairs. She looked at my face, and whatever she saw there made her exhale in a rush and grab both my arms. You're okay, she said. I'm okay, I said. She pulled me inside, closed the door, and stood with her back against it. She searched my face with her eyes, the same way she used to when we were teenagers, and I came home from something I wouldn't tell her about, looking for the truth in the part I wasn't saying. Tell me, she said. So I told her everything, all of it in order, from the moment I walked into that ballroom to the moment I walked out. I told her about the hand on her back and the wine glass and the threat on the patio. When I got to that part, her face went still and pale. He said that, she whispered. Right there, in front of people. 2 witnesses at the far railing, I said, and my phone recording the whole thing. She sat down on the edge of the couch slowly, like her legs had decided to stop cooperating. He's never said anything like that in front of anyone, she said. Never. He's always so careful. He's been careful around someone who was afraid, I said gently. He wasn't prepared for someone who wasn't. She sat quietly for a long moment. I watched the emotions move across her face, the same complicated tangle that survivors always carry, the relief and the grief and the strange guilt that comes from finally letting something end. Did he ask about me? she finally said. He asked if you were coming back, I said. What did you tell him? I told him not to the house, not to that version of things. She nodded slowly. Her hands were steady in her lap, more steady than they'd been the night before. I don't want to go back, she said, and the way she said it was different from last night. Last night it had been a wish. Tonight it was a decision. Then that's settled, I said. The next morning, I called a friend from my army days who had transitioned into family law. I didn't ask her for favors. I asked her to point us to the right person, someone who handled domestic abuse cases specifically, who understood the dynamics, who wouldn't look at a woman with a controlled bank account and a latch on a bedroom door and suggest mediation. She gave me a name, and we had an appointment by end of day. The attorney was a woman in her early 50s who wore reading glasses on a cord around her neck and kept a box of tissues on her desk with the practiced casualness of someone who understood what her office was for. She did not rush Claire. She did not suggest that things might have been misunderstood. She listened to the full story, asked precise questions, and when Claire was done, she said, "This is more documented than most cases I see. We can work with this." Hearing that, Claire pressed her hands together in her lap and breathed out so slowly it sounded like something she'd been holding for years. The weeks that followed were not linear. Healing never is, and anyone who tells you otherwise has either never witnessed it or is selling you something. There were mornings. Claire woke up convinced she had made the wrong decision. There were evenings she defended him to me in his absence, cataloging his good qualities, the early years, the man she had believed she was marrying. I let her do that. I didn't argue. She needed to grieve the thing she had lost before she could fully understand what she had escaped. He signed the separation agreement without contesting it. I heard through the attorney that he had enrolled in an outpatient program and had taken a leave from his firm. I didn't track his progress, and I didn't care to. What he did with the rest of his life was between him and whatever version of himself he decided to build. My only concern was that he stayed away from Claire. He did. She started with small things, the way people always do. She opened her own bank account the first week and cried standing at the counter in the branch. Not from sadness, from the specific relief of having her own name on something again. She bought coffee without texting anyone first. She rearranged her side of my guest room bookshelf and didn't ask permission. Small things. The kind you only recognize as victories if you understand what they cost to earn. By December, she had a part-time position at a nonprofit that served working families in housing crisis. She told me she'd taken it because she understood what it felt like to be inside a situation that looked fine from the outside and wasn't. She wanted to be the kind of person who didn't look away. One evening near Christmas, we were sitting on my couch watching old movies the way we used to do when we were teenagers. Take-out containers on the coffee table, her feet tucked under the throw blanket. The tree I'd put up for the first time in years lit up in the corner. She turned to me during a commercial and said, without preamble, "I want to tell you something." "Okay," I said. "When I called you that night, I almost didn't." She picked at the fringe on the blanket. "I sat in my car in that gas station parking lot for almost 40 minutes before I called. I kept thinking you'd be disappointed in me for letting it go on so long, for not leaving sooner, for not being the kind of woman who just leaves." "Claire, let me finish." She looked at me. "I want you to know that the reason I called was because I remembered something. I remembered that when we were little, probably 7 and 9, and I had that nightmare about the basement, you climbed into my bed without being asked. You just came. You didn't make me explain the nightmare or tell me it wasn't real. You just came and sat there in the dark with me until it passed." She swallowed. "I called because I remembered that you're the kind of person who does that." I didn't trust my voice for a moment. "I've been sitting in basements for 3 years, she said softly, "and you just came." Outside, Charlotte was quiet and cold and ordinary, the way neighborhoods are in December when people are inside with their families and their lights and their small private warmths. I thought about all the houses on all the streets that looked exactly like that from the outside. Warm lights, Closed doors. I thought about what lives inside those closed doors, what most people drive past and never see. I'll always come, I said finally. She leaned her head on my shoulder. We watched the rest of the movie without talking. Her breathing went slow and even, and after a while she fell asleep, something she told me later she still couldn't do easily in places that didn't feel completely safe. She slept the whole second movie. I left the tree lights on. Later, much later, when people ask me about that period, they often asked what the turning point was. They wanted it to be the dinner, or the recording, or the moment on the patio when Derek's voice went flat and cold and showed them both who he had always been. They wanted a clean, dramatic hinge that everything turned on. But that's not how it worked. The turning point wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small ones, each one made possible by the one before it. Claire calling me. Claire sleeping on my couch. Claire teaching me how she'd learned to be afraid. Claire standing at a bank counter crying over an account with only her name on it. Claire taking a job because she wanted to not look away. The victory wasn't mine to claim. It was hers, built slowly, painfully, one morning at a time. My part was just the door. She's the one who walked through it. If you have ever been on either side of something like this, whether you've lived inside that kind of fear or stood outside it wishing you could help, I want to say something directly to you. A breeze survives on isolation. It builds its walls one small restriction at a time, and it works best when everyone around it agrees, silently, to keep looking away. The most powerful thing you can do for someone you love is exactly what I did on that first drive across the city at 15 minutes past 2 in the morning. Just come.